Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the podcast based on the Thrive Bible Reading Guide. This is the ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 81 of Thrive Deeper. It is I, your friendly neighbourhood Santa Claus. That's right, DJ here for this Christmas edition of Thrive Deeper. Now, are we doing anything special for Christmas? No, just me saying Merry Christmas to you. This is a regular episode of Thrive Deeper where Matthew and I go through the book of Genesis. This week, we're going through, believe it or not, 5 chapters. Chapters 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. We say goodbye to Sarah. We say goodbye to Abraham. And we get introduced to Isaac's wife, Rebekah, and their 2 twin sons, Esau and Jacob. This is a huge episode, so much to cover, but I love this part of the Bible. I love these stories. Really important stuff. So stay tuned on Thrive Deeper. At the time of this recording, Christmas just around the corner. What is the Jacoby Christmas traditions?
We do the my kids would say presents. So that would be the first thing they all want, their presents.
Yeah.
If they need anything else. We do the Christmas tree. We do the traditional thing, and up to recently we've done the Christmas stockings, and we pack the this year we're actually going up to spend Christmas with my dad and
fantastic
near Byron Bay.
Beautiful, a beautiful part of the world. And whatever you're doing for Christmas, I hope you're having a great one. We're getting into, we're finishing up the story of Abraham here in this episode, which is an unusual thing to be doing around Christmas. I mean, that's the way that it falls. Yeah. But, bear with us because I still think there's going to be some lessons that will emerge out of this, some principles that will emerge out of this that will impact our Christmas as we celebrate together.
Yeah, perhaps people can think about where Genesis is reflected in the Christmas story. Now, there's an interesting line of reflection, homework.
There's some homework for you there. Now, we finished off last week in episode 80 with, in chapter 22, we've got, Abraham's faith has been tested. And then at the very end of that, we hear this weird little news story, like on the wire, that, and there's a point to this, it's lovely little seeding of the story here, that back home in Abraham's kin, back in the land of Uz, there has been, lots of descendants. There's, children being born. There's wonderful people. There's uncles and aunts and lovely nieces and nephews, like this girl Rebekah, and blah 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 blah. We get this little report there at the end.
That's right. Because of course Rebekah's going to come back into the story in a moment. So
exactly,
everything's connected. This is how she's connected. Yeah.
That's it. There's a point there. So we kick off chapter 23. Sometime later, Sarah is 127 years old, unbelievable age, and she passes away. She dies. In a place called, which is now called Hebron there in the land of Canaan. Abraham mourns for her. And then, this is the interesting part, we get the rest of the chapter about a land deal between Abraham and the men of the land. Yeah,
and again, reading this in the light of the broader kind of themes of the Pentateuch, and when I refer to the Pentateuch, I'm referring to the first 5 books of the Bible, which sort of stand together as a block. Yes. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those 5 books of the Bible, which were really the Bible for, for a lot of the, through the time of the kings and arguably through the time of the kings and beyond. And during even Jesus' time, for example, for the priestly class, the Sadducees, that was still the only Bible that they acknowledged was the Pentateuch. So certainly the Pentateuch sits together as a block. And in one of the big themes, of course, in the Pentateuch is the promise of the land. Now, I've already seen this in Genesis 15. God says to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land. So Abraham doesn't want this land to be given to him by the inhabitants of the land. He's actually going to really preemptively purchase this land. I mean, he's being offered it. Here, I'll give it to you. He wants to use, what God has given him to purchase this land. And so this becomes, in a way, it's like a preempting. It's like the first footprint in the land. And it's a burial place. And that's significant because where you bury your family really is your home, in a sense. It's important. So, for example, Joseph, when we'll see at the end of this book of Genesis, Joseph doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried in the promised land. And so where you get buried is kind of important for these people.
Exactly. And it's very symbolic here. I mean, Abraham's sitting down with the Hittite people, establishing this friendship. He's obviously very honoured. They love Abraham. They want to give him the land. He's marked out a place that he wants. He wants to buy it. There's a back and forth there. But it's very symbolic because this is the mother of the promise. The promised, son of whom the descendants come out. Where are we putting the mother of this new, this new people? And it is going to be placed into the land of Canaan here.
That's right, and of course Abram's going to be buried here as well. Later on. Yeah.
So it's an interesting story there as we wrap up chapter 23, and we move into one of my favorite stories growing up. Is Genesis 24, where we have Abraham as an incredibly old man, Isaac as a young man, ready for marrying age, and he takes his oldest servant, who I always read. I don't know if it was because of a picture book or because of other stuff. Eliezer. We get his servant Eliezer that we don't hear about for many chapters, but Eliezer is mentioned in chapter 15. Eliezer from Damascus. We imagine that he takes his trusted right hand man Eliezer and says, "Listen, go find a wife for my son amongst my people." And we've already heard just a chapter ago that there's lots of good people being born over there. So let's go find a wife for Isaac.
It's a touching story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting the amount of detail that it's given. It's quite a long chapter about a wife for Isaac, and you think, why is this given? It's good to ask these questions. There's never a nice story because it's a nice story.
Yes.
The question is why is this given the space that it is? And again, in the context of the Pentateuch, one of the key themes or warnings throughout the Pentateuch, particularly in the Law of Moses, anticipating entering into this land, is don't intermarry with the people of the land. Don't intermarry with the people of the land. And so Israelites were to marry Israelites. This is a way of them at this point, keeping themselves pure and holy, and because intermarriage would mean kind of religious syncretism as well. And so this prohibition against intermarriage is a really, really strong, and in many ways vindicated in the book of Judges, for example, where they do intermarry. It's vindicated in the story of Solomon, where Solomon marries these women and they lead him into idolatry. I mean, in many ways throughout the rest of Scripture, the command in the Law of Moses to not intermarry is vindicated in a number of ways. Yeah. But it's anticipated here in this story already. So Abraham, in a sense, this predates Moses. Don't marry the people in the land. Go and marry among our own people.
Yeah. And
so this idea of being what we would call being equally yoked.
Yes.
And there's a kind of enduring validity to this idea, I think. We rightly still talk about being equally yoked, that as Christians, we would encourage Christians to marry those that can share their faith, because faith is the most important. It's a central thing in life.
Yeah.
And where we can make this choice, we should put that first.
Yes.
And because that's at the deepest level. What's going to, it's like a marriage is a partnership in serving God's purpose, and
Yes.
so both being committed to God's purpose is important. Now, of course, we keep in mind also, and I'm getting into the application of this, but this is important, I think, at this stage, is that, the New Testament acknowledges that in most cases in the early church, one was a Christian and the other was not, and Paul speaks a lot to that circumstance and is very redemptive of that, and but you do, but there is this idea behind this story,
Yes.
that is an idea that carries Old and New Testament right through. This idea of being equally yoked, sharing this allegiance to the covenant God.
Yes.
And this is why this is given so much space here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. This is the principle behind it. Though we know that. As far as we know, that Rebekah and the family back in the land that Abraham had come from didn't know, this God, or, as far as we know. But I love the fact that we see in the, Abraham's right-hand man. I'm just going to keep on saying Eliezer because that's what I think in my head.
Yeah, it just says servant.
It just says servant.
We're not totally sure. But
old tradition. Old
sure.
tradition says Eliezer. I like the fact that
let's call him Eliezer. Yeah.
So Eliezer, comes and he prays. So Abraham's faith, this faith in the God, has affected Abraham.
Affected everyone in his household, even his servants.
Even his servants. So his right-hand man is like, okay, Lord God of my master Abraham, this is what he sent me to do. Give me success. I'm going to set something up here. If I do this, you do that. Da-da-da. And as he's praying, he looks up, and there's this gorgeous Rebekah coming along with everything he's prayed. He's like, oh, he knows that it's
well,
right
it's
on.
Even before he finishes praying.
Yeah.
God answers.
It's
It's beautiful, and so you get this wonderful sense of provision here.
Yeah, and so he starts asking questions. He does a little bit of his homework. He's asking about the family line and everything like that. And then she, he's giving her, gold. He's giving her, the different things that he's got. And then, she says, oh, we've got plenty of room. Everything's going to be okay. And he says, okay, great. And he just bows down and starts worshiping God in front of her. And she's like, okay, I've got to run. Bye. Yeah. And she races home and tells the family. And then we get, get her brother coming along. Once he sees the gold and he sees the nose rings and all the jewelry and everything like that, he comes, Laban comes racing in and it's like, come and stay with us. You've got all this gold. Tell us more. And it's a beautiful story. It's a really, really...
And it's important because this family is, it's this family that has received this promise, and so God is providing here in a way that, as I said, preempts what he wants for his people later on. It's like God is saying here, if you set your heart on what is right, I will provide for you. And we have this wonderful act of provision. It's interesting that the servant repeats the whole story. It's like you get the story twice.
Yeah, you get the story twice.
In a lot of detail. Yeah. And that is not an accident. The scripture never wastes words. Yeah. So the repetition of that story of how he prayed and then how God provided is actually underscoring something. Yeah. And it's this idea. You do the right thing and God will honour that and be your provider.
Yeah. So we get this beautiful picture to wrap it up there. Finally, Eliezer the servant is like, listen, I got to go. Like, I found her. God has been successful. Let me take her and go. And they're like, whoa, you just got here. And I think they're being culturally polite. They're saying, listen, God has provided. And they reference, Lord God as well. They say, look, Lord God has provided this. We're happy for this to happen. But we want to keep her here and we want to do our traditions and everything like that. But they say, well, let us, and this is a great, for some people who have trouble with, hang on, is she being sold off as a woman and women's rights and feminism and da-da-da. They say, Rebecca, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
We're leaving it up to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you want to stay with us? Go. And she says, no, let me go.
Yeah,
I'm ready to go.
That's right. Yeah, and she goes. And of course, and then along the way, she sees, it's a wonderful scene where she sees Isaac in the fields, and it's just like a Hollywood movie scene right there. And they're married. And so you get this, this sort of holy family, as it were, that is established here, and that sets us up for the future. Yeah. So it's interesting, when it comes to Isaac, there's a lot in these stories about Abraham, and there's a lot about Jacob.
Yes.
There's not a lot we hear about Isaac.
Yeah.
He's a fairly transitional. Certainly what we do see is that the promise is reconfirmed to Isaac.
We see the promise.
We'll see that in a moment.
We'll see that in a moment. We see, and again, this is something that I think your beloved Kierkegaard would have much to say on it. Yeah. We see him having faith in his father.
Yeah. Being
almost sacrificed by his dad.
Yeah.
And then being very silent, very, very close to it. There's an illusion there that he was close to his mother, that his mother's death was very heartbreaking to him.
Yeah.
And obviously very close to, Sarah's only child there.
Yeah.
And we see him loving Rebecca, falling in love, and that. But yes, there's not a lot of poems or songs from Isaac. He's a very quiet character.
Yeah, he is a quiet character in this. But that's not. Let's not make an argument from silence. Really, it's just. I mean, the interesting thing is the reason why Jacob. There's a lot of mention of him is because he's such a rotten sort of character, isn't he?
Exactly.
So it's possibly no news is good news here,
and that's the way we take it.
And certainly, as I said, the overwhelming idea here is this idea that God provides for Isaac, who has this very happy marriage. It says that he loved her and that he was comforted. And so that's important. That's not because remember, marriages were all arranged in the ancient world. So the fact that it says that he loved her means that, well, this is arranged by God, and they actually, it was perfectly put together.
Yeah.
So, he receives this wonderful provision here, as well as the promise being reconfirmed, as we'll see a little later.
So let's move into chapter 25. We finally get the death of Abraham. Now, this is the end of our patriarch here, the end of our father of our faith. But before he goes on to his great reward at the age of 175 years, we find out that after Sarah died, he took another wife.
Yeah.
He took Keturah.
Yeah, Keturah. Yeah.
Keturah. They had another 6 sons.
Yeah.
6 sons after Isaac there. So these are all Isaac's half-brothers out here. 6 sons, Zimran, Jokshan, all these different people. We're given
he was doing well, Abraham, at,
120-something, 130, 140, 150 years old. He was a healthy old fella, that's for sure.
I mean, he according to the text, he lives 175 years.
Yeah.
So he's really doing well.
Not only that, in verse 7 and 8 and 9, and there it says, Abraham lived for 175 years, and he died at a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying.
Yeah. No kidding. It's hard. I mean, one of the things that, when we talked about earlier in Genesis, these massively long life spans. It's like. That's the thing I don't get. That's probably the one question when I get to heaven I'm going to ask, like, what's with the long
lifespans?
And then it's just, it just was what it was, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah. So we get the death of Abraham here. We get a little bit of his his passing off the blessing to Isaac. We get a bit of his descendants, and then we move into an account of the family of Ishmael as well, the son of Abraham through Hagar, the Egyptian servant. We get a list of, Ishmael lived for 137 years. He joined his ancestors in death. Ishmael's descendants occupied the region of, blah, 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 east of Egypt, etc., etc. And they lived in open hostility toward all their relatives.
And again, that's interesting because Ishmael is born because of Abraham and Sarah's attempt.
Yes.
To make things happen in a human way.
Yeah.
And when you try to make things happen in a human way, what ensues is not peace, but conflict.
Even though it's sort of we get the feeling from this, and again it depends on people's traditions. I know we're not really told exactly. The only thing we know that when Ishmael died, we get a picture that both Hagar and Ishmael believed and received, from God and were blessed by God.
Totally. What's very clear in the text is that because of his promise to Abraham, God totally blesses Ishmael. But that's got nothing to do with Ishmael as a character, as we're going to see with Jacob.
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with Ishmael as a character. Yeah. It's got to do with God's promise to Abraham for Abraham's sake. So, but what we do see, and I think this is significant, is that he lives in hostility towards those around him. And so, it begins with this conflicted thing of them trying to make things happen in a human way. And it sort of ends in this state of conflict. And I think, again, the message here is between doing things God's way and doing things the human way, and doing things God's way leads to this state of peace, or in Hebrew, shalom.
Yes.
is the great goal here, to live in peace,
Yes.
But what we see with Ishmael is that he's living in hostility, so it's not a state of peace.
Okay, so my question to you, Matt, is when I read it this time, I noticed, again, because we're reading through Genesis, I'm noticing patterns, I'm noticing phrases, I'm noticing words. When the writer of Genesis describes the death of Abraham, it says he breathed his last and he joined his ancestors in death. Now, I don't know if that's just a cultural phrase. I don't know if there's a spiritual significance of that. But the exact same phrase is used of Ishmael in verse 17. Then Ishmael, at 137, breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. Is there a spiritual significance to that? And I know I'm just throwing this on the fly. Because I read that and I sort of went, man, maybe Ishmael, even though, they left and he was blessed and they had that relationship with God, did he continue to believe in the God of his father? Was he raised long enough with Abraham to believe in this God of his father? Even though they went down into Egypt, they married and settled in there. Is there any thought? Is there any tradition, any thoughts around that?
Well, there's tradition around it because, of course, Muslims would say that yes, he did, and so because they claim their lineage to Abraham through Ishmael. Look, it doesn't really say, but I think it's reasonable to think that he did. I mean, the fact that he lives even in conflict, as I've said, is more connected with the sort of conflicted situation in the past, but it's not. There's no lack of blessing here still upon him, and I think there's no reason to think that he would not recognise that this is actually given to him from God.
Yeah,
I don't think we can say much more than that really about this, but I think we could surmise that he probably did.
Yeah.
Now back to the phrase that you talked about being, and in the NIV it says they were gathered to their fathers.
Yes.
There's no sort of consciousness at this stage of some people going to heaven and some people going to hell. I mean, everyone, and you get this in Ecclesiastes, well, everyone just goes to Sheol. It's referred to as Sheol, which
the land of the dead.
The land of the dead. And there's no real sense of that, of separation there. Blessing and curse is something that you experience in this life. But what happens as time goes on with what we would call progressive revelation, and certainly in the New Testament, you get this opening up of more detail around this.
Yeah.
So you don't want to read too much in at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
People just die. There's not really any consciousness of an afterlife per se. Even the hope of resurrection just emerges later. It's sort of drip fed and it sort of emerges from Revelation later on.
Yes.
As does the idea of distinctive states beyond death.
Yes.
But at this stage, there's no consciousness.
So
There's no sort of sense of that. I mean, God knows that, but
yes.
the writers
So the
don't.
phrase here, depending on the translation that you're reading, is basically just a poetic way to say he went the way that everybody else has gone.
That's right.
He's died.
Yeah,
He's
that's
died.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so we leave it there. I wonder, again, this is me. We're going to go on one little tiny rabbit hole before we have our little break here.
I love your rabbit holes.
Well, I got to thinking. Sarah sent Ishmael away, and Ishmael was probably an older teen. He could have been 18. He could have been something like that when Isaac was coming of age, and he was sent away with his mother. And God had blessed them, and God made him succeed, and he lived a victorious life, and obviously did really, really well. I wonder if there was any way they kept in contact with each other, with Abraham and Ishmael kept in contact with each other, because Abraham went on to live a good 40 or plus years without Sarah there. And I wonder if the news of Sarah's death comes down to Ishmael and he says, well, now I can go back and visit my father, or anything like that.
Well, he does. He does, because it said, at least at some point, because when Abraham dies, in verse 25, verse 9, it says his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. I mean, I know it doesn't say more than that.
I know, but I wonder if he went back before. I know that he was there at the end, and it fascinates me that I imagine that scene of Isaac and Ishmael, these two brothers from these two, the man-made chosen one, coming together. I wonder about those relationships. I wonder about the human dynamics, and I wonder if Ishmael had gotten there beforehand at all, and had seen his father at the end.
Yeah, look. I think the fact that this is mentioned again, nothing's accidental in the text. So why is it mentioned here that his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him? Yeah. So Ishmael comes. There's still this connection. I think this is the point here.
Okay.
He still has this connection with Abraham. It's not lost.
Yes.
And he's there to honour him.
Yep.
And I think it may well be that there is this positive connection that's established before that. And I think it may be sort of alluded to here in this, that Ishmael's not cut off from the family. But there's still this, as I said, there's still this connection.
I love it. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back as we move into two new characters that we're going to meet in the book of Genesis. We've been waiting to meet these two. Let's take a break now on Thrive Deeper.
G'day, Thrive Deeper family. It's DJ here, and we just want to say Merry Christmas to you and yours over this time. We're releasing this episode in the week of Christmas 2019, and we want to thank you so much for all the well wishes and kindness that we've received from you over this year. We'd love you to head over to thrivetoday.net.au. Stay in contact with us there, and personally, I'd love you to connect with me on social media. If you want to do me a favor this year, if you've appreciated the podcast, you wanted to do something for me, little old DJ Payne, connect with me on social media, whether that's on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Snapchat, whatever it is. If there's social media, I'm there as DJ Paine. That's Payne with an E on the end. DJ Payne. You can find me across all the social media. Connect, say hello. I'd love to have a chat with you. In the meantime, head over to thrivetoday.net.au. All right, let's get back into it. Find out what's happening next after the death of Abraham, and who is on the horizon that God is going to use next in his promises.
It's Thrive Deeper, DJ here with you, and with me, of course, is Matt Jacoby. We are in high gear as we are cruising through the book of Genesis, through the chapters there. We have just buried our patriarch, our father of the faith, Abraham there, and we now are introduced to Isaac and Rebekah's two sons, the birth of Esau and Jacob.
Yeah. This is going to be an interesting relationship. Jacob is, of course, the father of the nation. He's going to be renamed Israel.
Yes.
Later in the story.
Huge.
And it's his 12 sons that become the 12 tribes. So Jacob is an important character in the Genesis story as the father of the nation. So a lot of how he's characterized in his journey is going to be enormously significant because in a sense he embodies the nation. There's a lot of things about Jacob actually that is quite, that sort of preempts perhaps the character of the nation. I mean, we'll get to that. But Esau also is interesting because he's the progenitor of the Edomites. Yes. From him's going to come the Edomites, and the Edomites are going to be the sort of traditional foes of Israel later on, are going to be sort of the arch enemies of God's people, of the Israelites. Psalm 137, remember, Lord, what Edom did on the day Jerusalem fell. It actually calls down curses upon Edom. And of course, Malachi, we have those famous, terribly difficult verses that are quoted then in Romans chapter 9. Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated. And there, actually, in Malachi, it's actually talking about the nations. It's basically saying one is under a curse and one is under a blessing. But this comes back, this conflict between these two already we see here. Now we're going to see actually, I know this is jumping ahead, but Esau is still a child of Abraham. He's still part of this line, and we're going to see him enormously blessed.
Yeah.
So Esau isn't cursed anywhere in this story, despite what may be assumed from later characterizations.
Yeah.
Esau is enormously blessed in this story. And actually, it's interesting to see how he's blessed. I'm wanting to jump ahead here. We're going to get into that in the next episode.
Let's cover the birth here, because there's something really important here as far as patterns go and as far as God goes and what he's telling us in Genesis. We find out that Rebekah is barren. This one that God provided for Isaac, the son of promise. Yeah. She's barren. She can't have a child.
And again you have these obstacles, natural obstacles. Yes. And there's this sense that these stories are showing us again and again that despite every obstacle, God's promise is going to be fulfilled. Yeah. I mean, again and again we have that. I mean, the story of Joseph is, what greater obstacles could there be to someone being sold into slavery and being thrown into prison? But through all of that, God's promise still gets fulfilled. So there's this kind of supernatural overcoming of these natural barriers,
and we get Isaac walking in the faith of his father, pleading on behalf of his wife to God answering Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah becoming pregnant with twins. But the twins were struggling so much in a womb that Rebekah goes to God and says, "God, help me! What is happening to me?" And God gives Rebekah and Isaac a prophecy that the sons in your womb will become two nations from the very beginning. Two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve the younger son.
Yeah, and it's interesting. She's experiencing this in her body. She's experiencing this conflict within her, isn't she? And so that's where she goes to the Lord, and he confirms this. So it's really interesting. You see that so much of this text, this is so characteristic of Genesis. Yeah. In interpreting these stories, I mean, one of the questions to ask is, how does this fulfill what God said? Because everything in the Bible is a sequence of "and God said," and it's so. But in a number of ways, you have stories, particularly in Genesis, that preempt what's going to happen. So, for example, in Genesis 12, there's a famine. Abraham goes down into Egypt. His wife gets taken. Yeah. And that preempts the Israelites going to Egypt during the famine, the time of Joseph, and eventually being enslaved. All of these stories preempt things. I've talked about the buying of the field preempts something, the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, that preempts things. Yeah. So here you have, again, something being preempted, something being warned ahead of time. Yeah. And it's already happening in her body.
That's amazing. And so the twins are born. Isaac is 60. Esau is born first, covered in thick hair, being very ruddy and red. Yeah. This little wild man is born, and then grasping onto his heel comes the slippery, smooth Jacob, born afterwards. Yeah. And we then immediately fast forward and watch them grow up. Esau is a skillful hunter. He's an outdoors man. He's the rugged wild man. And Jacob was quiet, staying at home. Isaac fell in love with his firstborn Esau because Esau, loved his dad, was an outdoor man as well. And Rebekah loved Jacob. Oh.
Yeah, and
of
course,
parenting books have been written about this verse. One verse.
Yeah, let's not copy them in this one. But of course, Esau is the older. Yeah. So, again, in this culture, as has been the case really until recent times, the eldest child has this birthright. That's kind of the cultural given at the time. Eldest son has the birthright. Yep. Okay, now that's going to be important for the story.
Firstborn son.
I think it's worth just noting Jacob's name because he's grasping the heel. So he's referred to as Jacob, which means he grasped the heel. But grasping the heel is actually a Hebrew idiom, which basically means deceiver.
Wow.
So Jacob actually is called the deceiver.
Wow.
Now, who else can you think of? One other character in the Bible is referred to as the deceiver, and that's Satan.
Wow.
So this is really interesting. So, and this is important too because Jacob's name is going to be changed later on, and he's going to be he's going to be characterized, and even in the stories that are shared about him, he has this characterization that is very much in alignment with Satan himself. And yet he's a child of the promise. So there's this tension in this story, and it's an important tension because that's going to change. He's going to go from being characterized this way to being one who wrestles or takes hold of God. And the transition from the one identity to the other is going to be because of this story that we're going to get to and we'll discuss of Jacob taking hold of God. So, which is itself this picture of faith. So it's just interesting here the way that Jacob is named. And a lot of people's struggles around this story is the fact that Jacob keeps getting the blessing. God keeps blessing Jacob, but Jacob's a bad guy. I remember reading this to my daughter Ivy, and she just could not get her head around this story. Why is God blessing Jacob? Because he's bad. God shouldn't bless bad people. That's it. And I said, well, Dal, that's exactly what this story is about. You've actually got it. Is that God is blessing a bad person because the nature of the covenant is it's not earned or warranted by people. This is about God's faithfulness, actually often despite the either lack of faith or the stumblings of people and the character, in this case, the character of people. So that actually is the point.
Exactly.
And it's a good point. And I said to her, well, but isn't that good? Because even when we do the wrong thing, and we can know that God doesn't stop blessing us, that God is, God's gracious. And I love these stories because of that very reason.
Well, we get introduced to a little bit of their temperaments and their personalities. We get red hairy Esau as a young man coming in. The two brothers have a tent together or something.
Yeah.
Jacob, being the indoor guy,
Yeah.
is a great cook. He's cooking up some stew. It's fantastic, a red stew. Esau's been out hunting for days. He comes home and he's like, brother, I am starving. Give me some of that red stew. And Jacob, not missing a beat, says, all right, no worries. Just trade me your rights as a firstborn son, and I've got some stew right here ready to go. And he's like, well, hang on, I'm dying of starvation. What good is my birthright to me now?
Yeah.
And he goes, and then Jacob seizes on it and says, right, okay, you will swear right now to me as your brother that I will take your firstborn role.
Yeah.
You know, I get the rights as a firstborn.
That's right. And that's the significance of it.
Yeah.
It's when he's talking about the birthright, he's talking about that position to inherit basically everything. And to take that firstborn place. Now, why does the question over this story is why does Esau do this? Well, the writer explains it in the very last line of that Esau despises his birthright. He's not
doesn't care.
Yeah, he really. Well, I mean, he does care in a sense that he becomes very angry later. Yeah. But the narrator here is. Is telling us something as well about, I guess, there's this sense that, Jacob gets something, and I know he gets it in the wrong way, but Esau loses it because he doesn't really value it.
For me, this is how. Tell me if I'm wrong, Matt. I've always read this in the point that at some point their father Isaac and mother Rebecca had told them the story.
Yeah.
I had told them the story. And they would have had, there is an overlap there with Abraham, their grandfather, type of thing. I think if I do the maths properly, there's some sort of overlap there. They're surrounded by this story.
Yeah.
That there is a blessing coming.
Yeah.
And Jacob, right from the very beginning, is like, I'm born second, type of thing. Whereas Esau is like, who cares about any of that stuff? I don't care. Whatever. I'm an outdoors man. Hooray! Like this different type of personality. And I've always taken it as Jacob cared about these stories and these ideas and roles for a personal gain. Let's be clear. For a deep personal gain, for the wrong reason. But also for the wrong reason, Esau despised it. It was
that's
whatever.
right.
I don't care.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So neither of them. I mean, in a sense, Jacob's eagerness to lay hold of this, in one sense, is commendable, even though it's for the wrong reasons and it's in the wrong way. Yeah. But part of the whole point of this is that God's not going to give something to us that we don't want or that we will despise. I mean, it's like this is a gift. This blessing is a gift to us, but it needs to be valued as well. And so we see here Jacob going after this, yes, in for the wrong reasons, in the wrong way, but Esau just has no ascribes no value to this. So, so I think that's true. I think there's something in that.
Yeah.
For later. Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the next chapter, chapter 26. We're moving and grooving here. Isaac. And we've got another old friend coming back, our good friend Abimelech, the Philistine. A severe famine strikes the land. And again, we're told right at the beginning, we're meant to be thinking in this way, has happened before in Abraham's time. So Isaac moved right next to Abimelech there, the king of the Philistines. God tells Isaac, do not go down to Egypt. Stay here, and as I promised your father, you'll be fine. And so Isaac stayed in, and I don't know how to pronounce the Philistine land, Gerar.
Gerar.
And when the men who lived there asked about Isaac, asked about Rebecca is so gorgeous. What does he do?
He lies. It's the same thing. Like father, like father, like son.
She is my sister. He was afraid to say she is my wife.
Yeah.
But then Abimelech, and again, this is crazy of Isaac here. Yeah. They're obviously right next door to Abimelech here, and Abimelech is honouring his promise to Abraham's son. Bringing them in and looking after them. And Abimelech is looking out and sees Isaac caressing Rebecca. They're having a romantic time there. And Abimelech's like, calls for Isaac and says, she is obviously a wife.
And of course, look, I mean, the other thing we're not quite sure about, this this may not be the original Abimelech, it may be his, because they were often named after their father. But the point is that he I'm sure he would have heard that story.
Yes.
So, there's panic stations here.
Yeah.
And he castigates Isaac for deceiving him. Like this it could have led to disaster. Now, fortunately, this time it doesn't.
No.
But eventually, one of the points of this is that, and I should note first how, repeatedly through this story, God reconfirms the promise. Okay?
Yes.
So, I just want to point this out in verse 4. It says, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky. I will give them all of these lands. And through your offspring, all the nations on the earth will be blessed. So the promise is reiterated again. The interesting thing is he goes into this area, and instead of bringing a blessing, he almost brings the curse again.
Yeah.
So the thing is, these guys are going to have to get better at trusting God, because if they don't trust God, they bring a curse rather than a blessing. That's an interesting idea. Yeah. He's being censured by Abimelech, I think rightly so, because he shouldn't have lied. He should have had anyway. So you get this reiteration of the promise here. Now, it's interesting in where the promise is reiterated. It says, this will happen because Abraham obeyed me, and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions. Again, initially, promise is unconditional, but Abraham steps into it through his obedience. Doesn't earn it, but steps into it. And so, see, if Abraham didn't step into it, then sure, he would have been blessed, but his children would not have been. Yeah. Because effectively he would have kind of forfeited it, not for himself, but for his children. It's like I don't have to obey God to receive God's favor and to be blessed. But if I want my children to be blessed, I've got to walk with God so that the promise gets passed on.
That's a great point.
And so again, Isaac's able to receive this promise because Abraham actually did the right thing. So for the promise to actually be passed on to the next generation, the generation before has got to really honor that and embody that and go with that. Anyway, that's an important point there.
And we get a fulfillment of that straight away in this chapter in verse 12. Isaac is being a faithful farmer. He's keeping his herds and everything. God blesses him. His wealth continues to grow. He acquires more sheep.
And we're meant to note that. Yeah. We're meant to note that God's blessing him.
The Philistines around him, Abimelech and the Philistines around him are going, oh boy, these Isaac troopers, the sons of Abraham here, they are going to town. They're actually more powerful than us. As a people. So Abimelech finally comes to Isaac and says, please, you're going to have to leave. I know we've met at a pact here, but you're too powerful for us. Please leave. They wheel and deal. There's some water rights they've got to work out and everything like that. And then finally, Abimelech comes back to Isaac. We see this in 26. His army commander, Isaac, straight away is a bit offended. Look, you've already kicked me off the land. What's wrong now? Yeah. And Abimelech echoes, whether it's the same Abimelech or another Abimelech, echoes the same thing. We see that the Lord is with you, and we want a sworn treaty with you. Let's make a covenant. Let's make a promise right now that we will keep our space and we will keep our peace to each other. Yeah,
it's interesting, this story, how, again, and I know I go on about this, but how it preempts things. So first of all, in verse 16, Abimelech says, move away from us, you become too powerful. So there's this idea that God's going to bless his people so much that they can't share that space with these people. They're going to have their own space because the blessing is going to expand. Yeah. And if they do stay with the people, and that's where from verse 17 you get all of this conflict, think, why is all of that? Like, why is it going into all of that detail? All of these quarrels between farmers, between the Philistines and the Israelites. Well, it's because from the conquest on, there's going to be all of this conflict between the Philistines and the Israelites. Why? Because they allowed them to remain there. And so there are these little kind of indications, this idea that God's going to give you this land so that you can so that he's going to bless you abundantly. It's like, you need space for this, and it also kind of anticipates the conflict that's going to happen. But, again, we have this, God appears to Abraham, says, don't be afraid, I'm with you, I'm going to bless you in the light of all of this conflict that's happening. Yeah. I'm going to bless your descendants, and Isaac builds an altar and he calls on the name of the Lord. This is Isaac basically stepping into this, expressing his faith. Exactly. Yes, I'm with this.
And then at the very end of this chapter, the very end of 26, we get the opposite. The last couple of verses here, we have Isaac. We've seen the pattern that Abraham had set. We've seen the way of the godly family. And Esau, in another way of like throwing it up in the family's face, at the age of 40, takes two Hittite wives, Judith and Basemath. And I love the final verse, but Esau's wives made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah.
Yeah.
And yet again, because the pattern had been, you go back to your land of your forefathers, you marry in, equally yoked, but Esau, nope, not interested in that. I'm going to take wives of the local area. Yeah. And in fact, I'm not going to take one, I'm going to take two. And I'm going to make your life miserable.
It's preemptive. Like I said, it's because this becomes such a big issue later on. So again, it's mentioned because of its preemptive force.
Now, let's finish today's episode in chapter 27, which is a huge chapter that really casts a lot of light on, it really sets, if the movie of Jacob and Esau, we've seen the preamble, we've seen the introduction, this is the first point of action here. This is a massive point of action. Isaac is old, he's blind, he's getting on, and he asks Esau, to make that stew that he likes. Go do the thing. Make me some, food that I like. Get the game and do that. Like my favorite son, my firstborn son. Go do that. Rebecca, overhearing it, slips in and gets Jacob to tell a lie, trick his father into receiving the blessing.
Yeah.
And it's a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, the blessing is not just, "Oh, bless you, my son."
Yeah.
This is actually a formal conference of the right of the firstborn. Yeah. So the meal is going to be that he's going to prepare is going to be the context for Jacob to formally confer the birthright of the firstborn. So, Rebecca's and Jacob's plan is to intercept this because, and Jacob feels that he's in the rights to do this because Esau has sold this to me. Yeah. So it's actually rightfully mine. And again, we have the deceiver at work, don't we? Oh. He's dressing up as his brother.
Smelling the same, wrapping hairy stuff around him. His mother is...
His father's blind, so he's going to take advantage of this.
And Rebecca, in favoritism for Jacob, she loves Jacob. That's her favourite son. She's got a favourite there. Yeah. And again, at this point, Esau's making her life a misery. Yeah. He's got these two Hittite wives that's causing trouble for us. Yeah. I want you to have the blessing, my son. So let's jump at it while he's away. We're going to do everything we can to trick your dying dad.
It's a strange story, isn't it? And so they do this, and he, he dresses up, makes this meal, and he gets this blessing. He gets the blessing of the firstborn, and then Esau comes back and realizes that this has happened, and the father says, he says, bless me too, but he said, I've got nothing else to give you. I've just conferred the rights of the firstborn, because. Again, I remember reading this the first time, thought, why can't he bless both his sons? Because I'm thinking of blessing just in terms of
well done,
well-wishing. Yeah, like may it go well with you or something. Yeah. Well, why can't he say that? Why can't you say that twice? Again, because that's not what this is talking about. This is the conference of the blessing of the firstborn. So this is a very formal thing. And because he's already given that to Jacob, he can't then give that to Esau. And so he simply says... to Isaac,
and it's a heartbreaking picture of Esau. I mean, we love to portray Esau as a bit of a the wild man clown, but there's obviously a deep affection between him and his father.
Yeah, that's right.
And when his father says, "I've got nothing left for you," you see him break down and bitterly weep.
But he's also sworn this to his brother. Remember, he's sworn on oath to give this to his brother. Yeah. So he actually wasn't going to stick to the deal.
Yeah, yeah.
He's going to go out, get it, and get the, so,
And
he's dug his own grave.
And Esau makes a point of it. He says, he's done this to me twice.
Yeah.
Now he has stolen this off me twice.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So he gets the leftovers, which is your dwelling will be away from earth's riches, away from the dew of heaven. He's going to live in the desert. In other words, you will live by the sword and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw off his yoke off your neck. Anyway. Not much of a blessing. That's right. But we actually do see... and it's really interesting to see how Esau, he actually does get more than this.
Yes.
And it's interesting to note how he gets more than this later on in the story. Because he's going to pursue his brother.
Yes.
He's going to go after his brother to kill him. Now, what does the covenant say? Those who curse you, I will curse. But then at one point, that's going to be changed around. And we'll see how it does. And he's going to bless his brother. And as a result, he actually gets blessed by his brother because the covenant also says, those who bless you, I will bless. Yeah. So in a roundabout way, it's a happy ending for Esau. I know that might sound confusing to our listeners, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful thing about that story is that Esau, even though he doesn't get this blessing, he still gets blessed through Jacob's it's in a sense this brings us back to this mediatorial role of being a mediator of blessing. He actually gets blessed by blessing Jacob, who, when he does that, has become Israel.
Yeah.
So there's something really significant in all of that.
So we finish up chapter 27 in the aftermath of Jacob and Rebekah's lies and him taking it. Esau is brooding. He's mourning his father. And he said, well, he's about to. He knows his father's close to death. I will soon be mourning my father's death, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. He is ready. This is what Esau is doing. Rebekah, who overhears everything in the household, says, right, Jacob, get out of here. And she's got two reasons. I'm not going to lose you. Yeah. Right? I'm not going to lose you. This is what your brother's doing. I need you to go to my brother in the land of our, the forefathers there. Find, and then the other reason, which he ties in at the end, is I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I would rather die than to see Jacob marry one of them. Yeah. So she's going to send him to her brother. He's going to make sure that Esau cools off, and then she's going to bring him back, and hopefully with a wife. Yeah. That's the plan.
It's interesting, in the story of Isaac, Rebekah is actually much more prominent in this story. Yeah. In a sense, she's kind of the hero of the story, and I know she conspires in this plot.
Yes.
But she's actually, in a lot of senses, Rebekah's got this right. She's not going to let him. She's not going to let him marry the local woman. She's going to send him off. She's protecting him. She's a very prominent character. Yeah. And I think in a positive light in this story. So he gets sent off. And again, it's preempting, don't marry amongst these people, marry among, in the midst of your own clan. And so he goes off and he lives with his brother Laban, and that sets us up for the next section of the story.
Chapter of Jacob.
He's going to get his own back.
Yeah.
If Laban's going to give him a bit of a taste of his own medicine.
100%.
And that's kind of, in a way, that's very providential too.
Exactly.
It's an interesting story to follow.
Exactly. So we have we've said goodbye to Abraham, and again, the echoes of all of those promises, the covenant that we have read over and over again with Abraham, that have been ratified again with Isaac over and over again. These are the foundations of the rest of the Bible. If we don't get these right in our mind of what God is doing and God's intention and the imperfection of the people that are getting these promises, I think we've sort of missed the point a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. And to me, that's the enormous encouragement of these stories. It reminds me that, God, through Jesus Christ, has enabled me to inherit this blessing. And the blessing, it's not, I need to step into this and respond to this and walk in this so that it can be true for me and my children. But I don't need to earn this. It's not abrogated by my imperfections. Even with my stumbling faith does not take away from God's faithfulness. I mean, this is Paul's argument in Romans 9-11. Just because we are unfaithful, God remains faithful. And even when we go through periods of, where we turn back to it, there's always the opportunity to step back into this, what I've called it, the stream of God's faithfulness. So it's like there is this firm promise. It's like the stream of God's faithfulness is there. We don't earn it. We don't make it happen. All we need to do is step into it. And it's always, always, always available to us.
What a great place to end up at the end of episode 81, in time for Christmas, as we are standing firmly in the promises that God gave Abraham all those thousands of years ago. And here we are, standing firmly in the same faithfulness that he was able to live his life in. It's a great place to be, and it's a great place to spend time this Christmas together as a family. Now, we will not be taking a break. We're carrying on through. We'll be back with another episode in time for the end of the year, and then straight into 2020 with an episode every Friday. That's our commitment to you for Thrive Deeper. Well, like I said, have a fantastic Christmas. We're really praying that you will have a wonderful time with your family, get a chance to take a rest and spend some time in God's Word and go deeper in it so that you and your family can thrive. We'll see you next week. Merry Christmas!
Thanks for listening to another episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ would love to hear your questions and comments about what you are reading in God's Word and in Thrive. The easiest way to do that is to head over to thrivetoday.net.au. Thrive Deeper is on Facebook. Just search and like Thrive Today page for all our latest news. Until next week, our prayer is that this podcast will inspire you to read God's Word and thrive.